Adam Kwarasey was all set to be Ghana's number one for a very long time. But then at the 2014 FIFA World Cup, after just one game, it all went up in smoke. Here's the story of Ghana's next great goalkeeper that never was. If you've never heard of Adam Kwarasey, well, it's probably because he never got the plaudits and the credit of being Ghana's great number one. Now, let me give you a bit of the backstory on this particular goalkeeper. So the year was 2014 and the Ghana Black Stars were coming into a period where we were coming down off the heights of arguably Ghana's greatest ever goalkeeper in Richard Olele Kingston. This goalkeeper, despite not being elite at club level, cemented his place and his position and his status in history as, the best number one that Ghana has ever had. His backstory is a whole other video altogether. His rivalry with Sami Eje at the time and how he was able to wrestle the number one jersey from him. We will get into all of that later. Today, it's about Adam Kwarasey. So in 2014, I'm not too sure if Kingston had retired at the time, but he was certainly out of the picture at the Black Stars. And Ghana were going through a bit of a transition period where we were trying to look for that next great number one. And it was around that time that Ghana had started flirting with the possibility of, having expat players come into play for the national team. And by expat players, I mean players who are of Ghanaian heritage that were either born, in other countries or were raised in other countries and potentially could hold citizenship in those countries. So, players like Kevin Prince Boateng, who I think is the most notable name. But right now, as of, today, we have the likes of Inaki Williams, we have the likes of Antoine Semenyo, all claiming that position right now. So, as it is now, where it's, I think, a bit in vogue and a bit in trend. You look at nations like Nigeria and then Ghana as well. Back then, there were very few of them for various reasons. I think the major one would have been the culture difference, because a lot of these players, I don't think necessarily counted themselves as Ghanaian. But Kwarasey was one who pretty much did, in my opinion. He was really dead set on playing for the Ghanaian national team, and he had all the attributes to succeed. He was very tall, which at the time, if coming off the era of Olele, we desperately needed a keeper who was able to cover distance. Olele is one of Olele's few shortcomings, despite his athleticism and his flexibility and just his general shot-stopping skills. It was his ability to cover, the ends of the post. I remember the Diego Forlan free kick that caught him out. Like, it wasn't a particularly exceptional free kick, but it just, him not able to reach the top corner was the reason why I think he got caught out in that particular instance. So for a player like Kwarasey to come at the time who had all of these attributes, he was playing at semi-top level in club football. It was kind of like a breath of fresh air. Like, we looked at him as the next Kevin Prince Boateng, because Kevin Prince Boateng had immense success in the national team. But we desperately needed a very good keeper, an elite keeper, because at the time, we had a few of them floating in and around, that number one spot, but nobody had really cemented it and made it their own. So going into qualifying for the 2014 World Cup, Ghana were, at the time, I think, the best team in Africa, in my opinion, and we're playing quite well. I remember the Egypt match en route to the 2014 World Cup, where we smashed Egypt 6-1 in Ghana. That was still one of the standouts, one of the standout results for the Ghana national team ever in history, in my opinion. But Kwarasey had kind of cemented himself as the number one player for the Black Stars at that point. And heading into the World Cup, we had, for the first time, I think in a very long time, we had a local coach, James Kwesi Appiah, who was coaching the Black Stars. So, I mean, you take this story with all of that context and it kind of begins to make a little bit of sense. So a local coach at the time coming in had Kwarasey as his undisputed number one heading into that tournament. In fact, the first game at that tournament, the 2014 World Cup, we were playing the USA. And the USA historically were the whipping boys of Ghana. You look at the 2006 World Cup, we look at the 2010 World Cup. Both times we played against the USA. Whenever we saw the USA in the list, we were like, cool chop. This is a team that, they should not give us problems. Well, now the USA, what did you know about playing international football? The USA crowd, which players do they have? So again, when we saw the group in 2014 and we saw the USA in our group, we were very confident, not least because that group had the likes of Germany and Portugal as well. So we're kind of looking at the group, looking at, okay, at least USA, there's some cool chop 3 points, and then the rest of them, if you can scrape some 1 point B here, we can kind of try and make it to the round of 16. Because, yeah, before that, I mean, we would have been confident because we had made it to the quarterfinals at the 2010 World Cup. But anyways, heading into that game, and again, I'll do a whole other story about that 2014 World Cup because we know about all of the issues that arose during that tournament, the money issues and the scandal involving, Muntari and KP. That's a whole other story. But the first game against the USA, I remember I stayed up late to watch it. That time they were playing the World Cup in Brazil. So the playoff times, the kickoff times were crazy. This one thing started, kicked off at 11 p.m. So yeah, it was a crazy game to watch. And Ghana literally conceded the earliest goal at the tournament. I think it was around a minute or less than a minute. Clint Dempsey managed to find his way through the Ghana backline. They beat John Boy, simple crowd, beat him easily and then slotted it past Kwarasey. Now at the time, watching the game, I didn't think Kwarasey did a lot wrong. But looking back, we saw that he couldn't necessarily, get his hands, he couldn't stretch out, to make a save. He probably should have made that save. And then the match went on, Ghana equalized. And then very quickly after, the USA scored the winner from a corner. John Brooks headed it down and into the net. And USA won 1-2-1. I mean, it was a good game of football. I gave USA a lot of credit, but it was very disappointing. And for some Ghanaians, it was unthinkable. It was like blasphemy. The USA had actually beaten us. And so a lot of people were calling for heads, for changes to be made, for heads to roll. And then we went into the second game, and there were changes. Most notably Kevin Prince Boateng starting, but even more notably, the goalkeeper dropped Adam Kwarasey for Fatau Dauda. At the time, again, as well, I didn't think too much of it. I mean, maybe Fatau Dauda had done something in training that, merited him to start this match. Maybe the coach was mixing it up because, again, at the time, I mentioned, no keeper had actually staked their claim for being number one. But Fatau Dauda came in with a lot of the shortcomings that Olele had as a goalkeeper. He wasn't particularly tall, and he had shown a proclivity for making mistakes. Most notably, even in the group stage, that very tournament, after he had taken the number one spot from Kwarasey. I remember the Portugal game, he literally palmed the ball straight into the path of Cristiano Ronaldo for us to lose that game 2-1, when potentially we could have won that game and qualified for the round of 16. So he wasn't perfect as well, but he got a start in this one, and I was like, okay, maybe there is some merit to why, he's playing this game instead of Kwarasey. But then, after that game against Germany, we ended up drawing 2-2. It was a very good game. Reports began to surface, and these reports were, very interesting because it came out in those reports that Kwarasey had been dropped from the team because he did not speak the local language. Now, yeah, I understand why it may be a problem for teammates to not be able to communicate effectively, because you need to be able to communicate. Defenders and goalkeeper need to be able to communicate, but it's still a bit of an issue because English is the language spoken in Ghana most commonly. But again, in a game of football, maybe you want that extra edge to be able to communicate where, other players wouldn't be able to necessarily know exactly what you are saying to each other. But it just didn't make sense that, the defenders, and that was the reports that the defenders came out to talk to the coach and say they had a problem with Kwarasey being their number one because he couldn't speak the local language. In this case, I would say maybe it was Twi, because that's the most common local language in Ghana. And I think maybe they were looking for any reason why they probably could have lost the game against the USA, and that was one that came out. Now, you look at players, other goalkeepers in the past, Joe Hart, for example, going to Italy to play as the number one goalkeeper for Torino, or David De Gea coming from Spain to United, not being able to speak a word of English. It has never been a major problem before, but it was a problem here for whatever reason that the keeper could not speak Twi or could not speak the local language, and then the defenders had an issue with that. It became a whole big deal. I remember even Kwarasey came out and he has gone on record not to confirm the allegations of him not being able to speak the local language. That's the reason why he was dropped. But he didn't understand why he had been dropped for the next game, because he didn't put in a particularly bad performance against the USA. And I remember, like, in those reports, you can check it out on Ghana Soccer Net, on City FM, their local, their news websites. Kwarasey said the coach couldn't even look him in the eye to explain why he had been dropped, and that kind of adds a bit of credibility to the reports that potentially it could have been for such a trivial reason why Kwarasey was dropped from the national team. Now, after that match, he went on a bit of a self-imposed exile, didn't really give himself up for selection. I could understand why he would have felt slighted on the biggest stage in world football, where, like the likes of Kevin Prince Boateng, he could have propelled himself to the next level, gotten a very big club move, essentially made his career, for a very innocuous reason as not being able to speak the local language. He was dropped because I don't believe that would necessarily have influenced his performance on the pitch beyond just, communicating with his backline, who, let's not forget, would have all been able to speak English, or at least some semblance of English. And instances where he has to command his box for corners and stuff like that. Training, obviously, you'll be able to form some kind of connection and communication with these defenders to be able to say that, okay, leave this, leave that, I want this, I want that. It was a very strange time. He did end up, giving himself the chance to be back in the team, made himself available, never really got onto the pitch again as a Ghanaian number one. And for a long time now, we've still been looking for that next great Ghanaian number one. But I remember that sentiment of Adam Kwarasey being potentially the next great number one for Ghana. Maybe I'm alone in this sentiment. Let me know in the comments if you also had this hope for Kwarasey being the next Ghanaian goalkeeper to emerge. But yeah, it was just a weird time. That whole 2014 World Cup period, I'll make another video on that tournament, on other instances that happened in the tournament with Sule Muntari and Kevin Prince Boateng, the money that was flown in. It was crazy, but I think this was one of the craziest stories that came out from the camp, that Kwarasey had been dropped. And to be fair, that was the last time he ever played for Ghana, for the Ghanaian national team. And it had been because he did not speak the local language. But guys, let me know your thoughts on this story in the comment section. Do you think it's true? Do you think it's false? Do you think it was justified? Do you think that Kwarasey has every reason to feel slighted for being denied the chance to be Ghana's next great goalkeeper because he didn't speak the same local language as the rest of the players? And guys, if you enjoyed today's video and this, insight and story, this football story time, then please consider leaving a like on the video, subscribing to the channel Oyibo Sports, and as always, I will see you for streets.